I'd like to welcome you to today's episode of Navigating Church Leadership and Culture. My name is Darren Woods, president of 365 Christ Centered Leadership. On today, I'd like to talk about the topic of take the bulldog out of the window. What in the world might you think has this have anything to do with church culture and church leadership and church revitalization? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Many years ago, there is a visiting revival speaker at my church by the name of Elder John Buffington. And Take the Bulldog Out of the Window was the title of one of his sermons during that 3 or 4 day period. Within that sermon, he gave an illustration of a clothing store owner who had recently opened a store in a mall. And much to his surprise, no one was coming in to purchase any of his clothes. He was very frustrated. And at some point, he asked one of his cashiers to go outside the store to try to figure out why people were not patronizing his store. They were going to a number of other stores around him, but not to his store. Well, the cashier spent some time looking around and trying to figure out what was going on. At some point, returned inside of the clothing store and told the owner, I found the problem. I found out why people are not coming into and purchasing clothes in your store. And of course, the store owner was extremely excited and asked the cashier, why is it? The cashier simply said, there's a bulldog in the window. Take the bulldog out of the window. Because you see, in addition to the mannequins that had various suits and shoes and hats, the store owner owned a bulldog and allowed that bulldog to sit right in the window glass display. And so the bulldog's presence was the reason behind people not going inside of his store. Take the bulldog out of the window. I will never, ever forget that. And so you may be wondering, well, how does this apply with regard to church revitalization, with regard to church culture and leadership? I'll tell you why, because in many churches, there are, in fact, bulldogs. What is a bulldog? Particularly, what is a church bulldog? Well, a church bulldog is anyone or anything that hinders a church from faithfully and successfully living out its mission and its vision within its community, both inside the four walls of the church as well as outside the four walls of the church. And some examples of church bulldogs may surprise you. You may have experienced some of these yourself, or you may not really fully understand or identify some of these church bulldogs. But let's talk about a few of them, shall we? One of the church bulldogs is, surprisingly enough, a church's website. It could be said that a church's website provides the curb appeal, if you will, with regard to a church. Just as there's curb appeal when it comes to looking at different homes to consider purchasing or just traveling in different neighborhoods, the church also has a curb appeal. And this comes through, or one of the ways in which this occurs is through websites. So take the bulldog out of the window. Is the website outdated? Is it antiquated? Does the church website have church speak and church terminology that will confuse or frustrate a visitor? The church website is actually not for visitors. The church website it is for visitors. It is not for members. Church website is for visitors. And so when you think about it, you want to make sure that the church website is inviting, is easy to read and understand in terms of the service time or times, the day of different services, whether childcare services may or may not be available, or daycare services, etc. So that's one bulldog that you want to make sure that you take out of your church's window, because it's oftentimes the very first thing that people see when even doing a Google search in terms of churches in their area. regardless of where it may be from the standpoint of where they may live, or perhaps they are visiting relatives, etc. They want to know. Another example of a church bulldog that we definitely need to take out of the window is the church facilities itself. Take a look around, walk around as you drive into your church. Take a visual a check, if you will, of the first things that individuals would notice. Are there shrubberies that are overgrown? Are there weeds? Are there outdated church signs? Is there anything outside or surrounding the church that may detour someone from wanting to come in? Take a look at the number of handicap accessibility parking spaces that you have to see if there are enough parking spaces, or even above and beyond the handicap accessibility, are there enough parking lots, or are most of the spaces very quickly filled by the faithful members of the church, and within 5 to 10 minutes before church service begins, most of the parking lots are parking lot spaces people don't know about or are unable to find very, very easily. Another church bulldog, and boy, I tell you, there are a lot of them, but one of them could very well be what we often refer to as the holy huddles or the cliques in the church. There's nothing worse than walking into a church and having absolutely positively no one talk to you. Or if it is, it's a very generic, somewhat cold-hearted hello or how are you. Visitors need to and want to feel welcome in the church. So if you have, and you should have, a greeter or more than one greeter in your church, make sure that person has a hospitality heart, that regardless of what challenges they may be experiencing on that day or in their season, that's not something that is easily transferable to someone else. And the visitor may not know why the greeter basically has a really bad attitude, like here's the bulletin, or things of that nature. You want to make sure that these and other examples of church bulldogs are identified, because we don't want a situation where, again, the church, in whatever intentional or unintentional manner, actually has things set up that relate to visitors feeling unwelcome or unwanted. So you may be thinking, well, what are some ways in which we can eliminate church bulldogs? Well, I have to tell you, and this is perhaps unsettling, but we can't completely. There are so many different nuances which occur that are part of the church bulldog approach. However, here's some tips, here's some considerations, so that when you are talking with your church leadership, when you're a pastor, if you're talking to your parishioners and greeters and things of that nature, what are some things that could be done to at best minimize these church bulldog situations? Well, first of all, you need to acknowledge that there are bulldogs in the church. That store owner needed to acknowledge that he had a bulldog in the window. And guess what? He quickly removed that bulldog, and customers began to come inside of his store and purchase his product. The other thing is, in addition to acknowledging that all churches have bulldogs, is the importance of identifying what the bulldogs are. It's not enough to simply say, well, there are certain hindrances that take place, but oh well, maybe that person really didn't want to come to church. I don't think that we should be so quick and so flippant to discard the very real things that occur in churches or outside of churches that may hinder people from coming inside of the church. So make sure you acknowledge that bulldogs exist, identify what those bulldogs are, and in addition, you want to discuss them. They should not be a secret. Now, certainly, this may be something that you discuss in a church meeting or meeting with your leadership, or one-on-one if you notice that, for instance, again, with the greeter, if you notice the greeter is being somewhat cold or unkind or somewhat lackadaisical about the ways in which they greet guests, go to that person and speak to them one-on-one, privately, and express what you've noticed, and perhaps it's something that the greeter hasn't even considered. The other thing is, as best we can, remove the bulldogs. Now, again, we talked about anything and everyone that hinders the church's faithfulness and success with regard to its mission and its vision. I don't mean to suggest that you remove that you in any way begin to think that you should have that member removed from a member, or removed as a member from your church. I'm referring to perhaps a situation where there may be some rotations that take place, so it's not the same person. Maybe the greeter is mentally, emotionally drained, and then wants to be a part of the service, or maybe it's a situation where someone didn't realize that there were weeds in the parking lot, or it hadn't been brought to their attention that maybe 2 or 3 additional parking spaces might need to be identified as a handicap parking space. So regardless of where you land, I'm reminded again, and what a great and powerful example that Elder John Butler provided. Take the bulldog out of the window. Take care, and God bless.